Okay, getting ready to record the Matters of Faith podcast. Normally I have guests or I go through other topics. Today I am recording an episode that is specifically readings. There are going to be two short stories. One is an unpublished short story called Every Grave the Same. Eventually it's going to appear on my Patreon page. It hasn't been, like I said, it hadn't been published anywhere yet. I'm going to read a story called Curse of Smoke and Light that appears in my Beautiful Darkness collection, which is available on my website, jwilburn.com. And then I'm going to read a story from Lake Scatterwood Tales Book 5, which just recently came out. There's two stories in each book, and I'm going to read the first of the two stories from Book 5. It's about 8,000 words altogether, so a little bit longer than the two shorter stories that I'm doing, but still probably considered a short story by example compared to others on length. And these books are for middle grades readers, maybe upper elementary as well. So that story will be a little younger focused than the other two stories are. I don't think there's anything particularly dark or graphic in these particular stories that I'm choosing from. All right. I don't know if you can hear it over the broadcast, but we live like in a wooded area, and across the river is a hunting area, private land or whatever, and apparently people are target shooting over there or something. So I'm hearing a little bit of that over my headphones. I don't know if you can hear it on there, if they'll hear it on the podcast either. So this will be me recording the podcast, and like it says in the description, this will air on May 4th, I believe. And this is sort of the raw recording. When I don't have a guest on and it's just me talking, I usually do it all in one recording, and then the music and intros and outros and that kind of thing are added on in editing. So that's kind of where we are on this. So you'll get to hear that whole thing or as much as you actually listen to. So we'll get into that. All right. You have found the Matters of Faith podcast on Project Entertainment Network with your host, Jay Wilburn. This is episode 170. Today I'll be doing some readings. There'll be two short stories and then a little piece of a story from my Lake Scatterwood Tales books, which are for middle grades readers and elementary readers. It's kind of geared a little younger in terms of vocabulary and that sort of thing, so that struggling readers can enjoy it. So today I want to do something a little bit different and share some stories here. Before we get into that, I want to remind everyone there's advertising opportunities here on Project Entertainment Network, and specifically the Matters of Faith podcast. If you're interested in advertising on the Matters of Faith podcast, I have very reasonable rates I'd be excited to discuss with you. So just contact me directly and we will discuss that and get your passions before the audience. Again, podcasting is a great place to advertise because the advertisements stay on the shows forever and people will go back and listen to old episodes. So you're constantly getting new contacts with your advertisement apart from the initial day the show comes out. So thank you for considering advertising with the Matters of Faith podcast and Project Entertainment Network. And now we'll get into the rest of the episode. This is the Matters of Faith podcast on Project Entertainment Network. Today I'm going to read for you a few stories. The first one is called Every Grave the Same. It's a unpublished short story, and one that was entered in a contest, didn't win. There was a publication offer for it, but I turned it down for various reasons, and it may publish sometime in the future. I am probably going to post it on my Patreon page as a separate piece probably later in the year, so you guys are getting a good preview on that. So again, Every Grave the Same by Jay Wilburn. Even with gloves on, the boy could only dig up so much grave dirt for so many nights before his hands blistered and bled, but he never gave them time to heal. He started to suspect something after the death of his father. Boys get used to not being told the truth by adults, either trying to protect the young or themselves. Given enough time, you just grew to accept it, but you could still smell those kinds of lies. They were the worst hidden of all lies because they didn't respect boys enough to believe they could smell them out. Dad's grave had been the first he dug back up. He wasn't experienced with exhumation back then, but the earth was fresh turned, so it was easier. Still took him until almost morning to dig down to the box, and another hour to screw up the courage to break it open for the truth. It didn't make a lick of sense to him then because he hadn't opened another grave for comparison. It was well past daybreak before he filled in the narrow hole he dug straight down for the head of his father's pine casket. He'd come home and lied to his mother about playing out in the creek before she'd woke up. When he volunteered for a bath before breakfast to get his daddy's grave dirt from his arms and out from between his teeth, he was sure she could smell his lies too. He dug faster these days, even with the cemetery ground hardened with age and the creep of winter cold. He finished burying the truth again each time before dawn and got back home in time to wash off the evidence of his disbelief, to catch a couple hours sleep, but he still only got one grave dug up and reburied per night. Tonight he was breaking ground on his third. Pushing early hours, pre-dawn was already bleeding purple along the horizon, and he hadn't repacked the first two graves of the night. After the inaugural dig on his father's plot, he'd gone through the other family graves in succession, from the old to the older to the oldest. He exposed the same stinking lie in each one, but he couldn't yet explain it. Then he moved his desecration to neighbors and friends. From there he exposed strangers' resting places one plot at a time, night after night. He dug up graves of long-gone men who passed too long ago to have anyone who still remembered them, much less still loved them. The boys strongly suspected, if a cop's light ever fell on him during his dirty work, that they'd care enough to charge him for it, shame his mother. He even spent a week digging up 7 graves over on the far hill, where the stones were all white and in perfect lines, over where men were buried from a war that some still fought today with their words and their votes. Some of it might be explained by rot and decay, but not all of it, not every single grave, from every single era. Many times there was a casket. A lot of times there wasn't. On those nights the boy dug 8, 9, 10 feet before giving up to the truth. The first grave tonight was a 10-footer, with nothing but topsoil, mud, and clay in that order. An old school teacher, with 40 years in the classroom and 80 years on the earth, was supposed to be buried there. The second for a 3-day lived infant boy named Peter Cross, who was only 3 feet down to a tiny coffin, and the boy could lift it out with one hand. The lid opened on toys and picture books, but no body, and no hint of remains of one. True dawn rose over the eastern trees, but the boy finished his third dig well past breakfast. He'd get caught by mourners or caretakers or patrolmen soon. At least one of those liars had to know the truth. If they didn't, they were about to on account of the boy was done digging it all up alone. Can't arrest a boy for disturbing graves that ain't graves. A grave needs a body. His shovel clunked the lid of a mahogany top that still had its glossy finish. He stabbed through with the spade of the shovel, revealing silk lining, but no Mr. Gregory Payne, loving father and husband. The boy climbed out and squinted into the light at a man approaching from the sunny side of the graveyard. He waited on his knees with the confidence of a prophet armed with the gospel truth. It didn't take long to recognize features. At first he thought it was his father, upright and breathing. Then, even though he'd supposedly died when the boy was much younger, he recognized his grandfather. Knowing the truth made seeing things for what they were quicker and easier work, like digging up enough graves. He dug up Grandpa's empty grave long ago. No one really dies, boy. His grandfather didn't wait on the question. But you can't stay around and fill up the earth. When we're tapped, we go to move on to make room. Who all knows, old man? All of us, out past the woods and you. Some that have to do the burying, others like you who won't let it go. Why not just go on and save this land for farming or something? Some folks need to believe we're here, easier to let go, sometimes harder. I'm going to tell. They gotta want to believe you first, Grandpa sneered, more than he smiled. You can come visit us on the other side of the woods any time you want, but once you go, no going back. Your mama's waiting for you. He turned for the sunny trees without waiting for an answer. The boy stayed on his knees, covered in dirt, thinking a while. Okay, so that was Every Grave the Same by Jay Wilburn. Pretty sure that one will see a collection one day. The next one I'm going to read is from Beautiful Darkness, a collection of fiction by Jay Wilburn. This one is only available on my website, jaywilburn.com. It's available in paperback and ebook. I decided not to publish it on Amazon because I wanted to run an experiment to see if I could sell books without using Amazon. This particular book is doing pretty well, and it has one story in it that was nominated for a Splatterpunk Award. So in terms of my collections and books and things like that, this one is a pretty successful one and has never appeared on Amazon. So all the sales have been through my website or in person at conventions. I've read stories from this before on the show and other places, and I'm not positive whether I've read this one or not. So this may be a repeat somewhere. I know for a fact the other two stories I haven't read publicly anywhere. So this one may be a repeat depending on how closely you follow me. But I still think it's a pretty good story, and it's not that long. This one's called Curse of Light and Smoke. He drew the pack upward through the night. The light of the three-quarter moon bristled the fur along his back, making the cold feel more bitter. Snow would fall soon. He could smell it and feel it in his bones, still stiff from the slumber of the day and the aching transformation at dusk. He knew he could think better during the day, slower but more deeply. At night he could move, but everything was passion, hunger, anger, fear, and every limit of emotion, but none of the softer colors in between. Some nights he wished he could remember his name. At times it almost came to him during the slow days when thoughts and wisdom flowed like sap. During the night he remembered nothing except how he felt and the dangers of those who hunted them even after all these centuries of cursed existence. He did not remember his name nor his crimes against nature worthy of this curse. He wished every night that he could remember her name. She ran beside him and drew blood with him for food and fight, until her lighter fur was splashed with gore, her snout stained, and her teeth bared. He did not feel fear when he saw her like that, but only passion. He remembered loving her in passion, and in the subtle colors between, before the curse took them both. He would give anything just to remember her name. Maybe it was a blessing to live longer with her through this tortured existence. Her muscles pumped up the mountain, and her energy spurred him on, with the pack following. Snow was coming. Ordinary mortals would cut down trees during the day if they stayed in the lowlands in the winter. Even the ones not hunting them for who they were would unwittingly take them for what they thought they were. Dawn broke quickly on the mountain height. The change came on them all with gut-wrenching suddenness. Some still fell to the ground and curled with it, but he had learned to stretch to have it finished sooner. He always stayed close to her, so they stayed rooted together through the slow days. The fur retreated to raw flesh, which stretched long and slender as bone broke apart within him and then dissolved completely. His flesh bruised with hard, grooved bark, and branches sprouted from his body like deformity and tumors. He became a tree, and the rest of his grove, with her firmly rooted next to him. As thought returned to him deeper and slower, he realized the other trees at this point on the mountain slope were white and speckled black. His grove was darker. If any hiker or trapper wandered by, they would stand out and be quite a curiosity. Nothing to be done about it now. They would need to travel higher the following night before they were far enough. Maybe nowhere was far enough, but they were cursed with fur and bark, and not blessed with wings or feathers. So the top of the mountain was the best they could do. Images of the past slipped through whatever consciousness he had during the days without eyes or brain. Castles, no context. But he remembered their shapes and lines in stone. He felt the weak sunlight feed into his leaves. It was small nourishment. He would be famished when the darkness returned, fur and hunger to him. Fields of grain, endless, extending forever over flowing hills. It was food, and it was work. He had been small, and the stalks were higher than his head when he was in them. Fire took them. It took the grain and lives. He felt the wind move his top as his trunk held firm. He felt her stiff branches brushing against his as they moved together and apart. Rachel. He pondered on that word for a long time. His name was nowhere to be found, but her name had finally come to him. He felt as much joy as he could at the grand discovery of her name, while scarred from root to twigs and bark. The day grew dark, and he felt a change. No fur, though. It was slow, confusing. Eyes and face formed partially on his trunk. The day was dark, and this happened sometimes. He could not speak or move, but he could sense while still having the better mind of his daytime form. He smiled and looked up into the dark daytime sky. Something was wrong. The black cloud cover moved too swiftly, and it was laced with sparks. It stank of carbon. He turned his eyes in the slow way he was able. The fire line climbed the mountain in an orange blade of death. His slow senses saw the line jump in time quickly as it moved faster than he could process. Others were afraid. He could not turn to see them all, but he could feel it off the grove. He slid his eyes around in their wooden sockets and looked into her partially formed features. Rachel was terrified. He could not save her. He could not protect her. The full understanding of it drove him insane. He drew back into himself so he would not witness her end. He would not watch it all come apart. Not now, not for Rachel. He coughed as the smoky darkness of cursed day gave way to the true darkness of frigid night. He curled against Rachel in the ash on the slope as they shivered together, their fur spiked with cold and fear. The trees around them, both light and dark, were charred black and blistered. The rest of the grove was gone. Now they were a pack of two. Rachel rose first and moved a few paces away. She looked back at him, not in fear, but in determination. They needed to go. They had to find other trees to be between, on another part of the mountain, away from the wounds of fire, away from those who still hunted them in night and in light. They were both alive and still together, as much as they could be under this long curse of light and smoke. He stood because she stood, and he could run because she ran. Eventually, she would let him know it was time to eat, probably after they were within unburned forest again, a place they would not have to remember the loss. He felt better running with her. He wished he could tell Rachel her name just so she too could hear how beautiful it sounded. All right, so that was Curse of Light and Smoke from Beautiful Darkness, a collection of fiction. The final story I'm going to read today is from Lake Scatterwood Tales, Book 5, Gnomes, Orange Hats, Sea Monsters, and Swimming Lessons. These are books for middle grades readers. Again, upper elementary can read them, and then people just looking for an easier adventure story. There are 2 stories in each book, and I'm going to read the one about gnomes. The title of that story is Don't Make Fun of Gnomes' Hats. They are really sensitive about that kind of stuff. So that's the name of the story. This one's about 8,000 words, so a little bit longer than the other 2 stories I've read. It's broken down into small chapters for kids to read, but I'll read it now. Chapter 1. Rebecca was bird watching. It wasn't her first choice of an activity. You don't always get your first pick of what you wanted to do at camp, but she always tried to face things with the best attitude. So when she was assigned to bird watching, she decided to prepare. She had binoculars, a book that showed many different kinds of birds, a notebook to draw and record details about birds she might see, and she'd bought a big floppy yellow hat to keep from getting too much sun. Bird watching sometimes included a lot of sitting around and waiting for birds to show up. That's a big floppy hat. Rebecca looked up. It was one of the girls from her cabin named Destiny. That's the idea, Rebecca said. It keeps the sun off my face. Rebecca expected Destiny to make fun of her. Destiny had other friends. She mostly hung out with them. Destiny didn't want the bird watching activity either, but had a much worse attitude about it. Rebecca had grown to like it a little. She had recorded a few bird sightings already. In the evening, she had used colored pencils to finish the drawings of the birds she'd seen. Rebecca had caught Destiny rolling her eyes that night. Destiny said, "That's a good idea. It's not the most fashionable hat, but there's no one out here to see us except the birds, right?" Rebecca smiled. "I guess not. Have you seen any birds today?" "No, but I wasn't really looking, to be honest." Destiny held her hands up to block the sun from her eyes. "I keep checking my watch to see when we get to go back." "We just got here," Rebecca said. "I know, don't remind me." Destiny rolled her eyes again, but Rebecca didn't think it was meant to be mean. "Do you want to sit with me a while we wait?" Destiny shrugged. "Maybe. I'm going to walk around a while to kill some time. I might swing back by." "I'll be here." Rebecca held up her binoculars to look around. Still no birds. Destiny took a few steps and then stopped. "Are you going to the camp store after this?" Rebecca said, "I think so, maybe. If I don't come back by before we're done with the birds, I'll see you there." Rebecca nodded and smiled. "That'll be fun." She watched Destiny walk away. Maybe she wasn't so bad after all. If Destiny's friends were here, she might not have talked to Rebecca at all. Of course, if Sam, Jack, and Cody were here, Rebecca would have been hanging out with them. Rebecca decided she needed to give Destiny and some of the other campers more of a chance. She saw something over in the rocks, deeper in the forest. She looked through the binoculars and got her bird book ready. There was an app on the phone that had all the same information, but the kids weren't allowed to use their phones at camp. It took her a second to find the rock again. Through the lenses of the binoculars there was nothing there to see, but Rebecca tried to be patient. She waited and waited. She was about to give up but then waited some more. And she stared through the binoculars at the big rock. Then something moved again. It was quick, but she saw it. After a moment it moved again. Orange. She saw the color orange pop up behind the rocks and disappear a third time. Rebecca put down her binoculars and picked up her bird book. Chapter 2. She flipped through the pages. Each bird had its own page with a picture, details about the bird, and facts. They were organized by species and regions. There was no organization by color, which is what she needed. "Orange," she said out loud. She looked up at the rock, but didn't see the orange bird pop up from behind the rock again. Rebecca started flipping through the pages, looking for the color orange in the pictures. It wasn't the most scientific way to do it, she thought, but maybe it would be quick before the bird flew away. Orange flashed by on one of the pictures. She turned back a few pages to find it. The Baltimore Oriole had orange feathers on its chest and sometimes on the wings too. She flipped a few pages. So did the Bullock's Oriole and the Orchard Oriole. Pretty much all the Oriole species did. She kept flipping pages. The varied thrush did too, as did the black-head grosbeak, the black-burning warbler, the American robin, flame-colored tanglers, and rufous hummingbirds all had some orange in their feathers. The ruddy kingfisher had an orange beak and brownish feathers. That probably wasn't it. The European stonechats might look a little orange, maybe. Says Phoebe's had a little orange on them, but they lived in dry, desolate areas. That wasn't like Scatterwood. An orange fruit dove, also known as a flame dove, was bright orange all over. They didn't live anywhere near the area of Lake Scatterwood naturally either, though. She wasn't sure which one it was. Some of them had darker orange feathers, others had lighter orange colors. She couldn't really tell the difference herself. She marked the orange bird pages in her book with several bookmarks she had with her. Some people were fine with folding down corners of pages in their books. Rebecca was not one of those people. She had brought bookmarks with her, just in case she needed to mark some pages of birds she saw. But which orange bird was this one out by the rock? She still didn't know. Rebecca picked up the binoculars again, nothing to see at first, but she waited. There it was again. That orange shape popped up from behind the rock. She saw it, but couldn't get any details of the bird, except the orange color. She waited some more. 3 of them? 3 orange shapes popped up from behind the rock. They bounced around a little, then they were gone. She waited, but they didn't pop up again. Now she heard something. Rebecca lowered her binoculars and listened. It was leaves. Leaves were crunching and rustling from the direction of the rock. As she watched and listened, dry leaves flew up in the air from behind the rock. The orange shapes didn't come up again. Rebecca knew she was supposed to sit still and watch, but she wanted to see what birds these were. As she walked toward them and scared them, at least she would see them as they flew away. She would be able to see their wings and maybe their beaks too. She gathered her things into her backpack. She wore the binoculars around her neck and carried her bird book in her hand. Rebecca tiptoed through the leaves toward the rock. She felt like her feet were making a lot of noise, but the birds and the leaves on the other side of the rock, where she couldn't see, didn't seem to notice. They kept thrashing around in the leaves. Maybe they were looking for bugs to eat and hadn't noticed her yet. She reached the rock and still heard the birds on the other side. She waited for a full minute, but none of the birds popped up where she could see. Rebecca climbed up the side of the rock and reached the top. She held her breath and held onto her floppy hat as she slid along the top of the rock until she could see over the side. Chapter 3. What she saw made no sense to Rebecca. At first, she only saw leaves flying around from everywhere on the ground. Then she saw birds. The birds were fighting each other on the ground. Then she realized they weren't birds. They were about the size of birds, maybe a little bigger. They were not birds. They were little men. The little men were taller than her ankle, but not as tall as her knee. They also wore floppy orange hats. Maybe that was the orange shape she had seen pop up from behind the rock. They had weapons. All the tiny men with floppy orange hats were fighting. They were fighting really hard against each other. A few of them fell to the ground. They rolled around, scratching, clawing, and even biting at each other. Others stood and fought with swords in their hands. The swords were shorter than Rebecca's drawing pencils, but they were metal and they looked sharp. The tiny swords pinged off of each other quietly as the tiny men continued to fight each other. One of the fighters snatched up another tiny man's orange hat and threw it. It flew up higher than the rock from where Rebecca watched and fell back into the leaves. "Be gone, you silly light orange hat," the tiny fighter laughed in a high voice. The other tiny man dropped his sword and ran to get his hat. "Stop it, you dark orange hat bully." They continued to fight and continued to throw each other's hats over and over. After a couple minutes, half the little men ran away with the others. "That's right," one of the tiny men yelled in a high voice. "Get out of our kingdom, you dark orange hat fools." One of the men running away waved his tiny sword in the air. "We won't rest until every last one of you light orange hat monsters is destroyed." Rebecca tried to look closer at the hats the tiny men were wearing, but they all looked the same to her. Then something even stranger happened. The men who were running away jumped on the back of a flock of birds with orange feathers. "We'll be ready. We will see who truly rules the gnomes before this is over. We promise you that. Up, take us up." "Gnomes," Rebecca said. She couldn't believe it. The birds took to the air with the gnomes on their backs. The birds flew over the heads of the gnomes on the ground. The gnomes on the birds called out, "Long live the dark orange hats!" "For the glory of the light orange hats!" the gnomes on the ground shouted back. Then the birds flew away with the gnomes on their backs. Rebecca flipped through her bird book to check. American robins. The birds the gnomes flew away on were American robins. She had already seen and drawn one of those earlier in the summer. It did not have a gnome on its back. Maybe I should draw a new picture, she wondered. Destiny would really have some questions if she saw that. She closed her bird book and said, "I've got to tell Sam, Cody, and Jake about this." "We've got to stop them," one of the gnomes on the ground said in a high voice. Another gnome stomped his foot and crunched a leaf. "There will be no peace until the dark orange hats are driven from the land." "My brother was with them," another gnome said. "I can't believe he joined the dark orange hats. I would never talk to my brother again if he did that." Rebecca shook her head as she watched. "All the hats look the same to me." She spoke a little too loud. "A giant!" several of the gnomes yelled. "She must be a dark orange hat spy." "I'm not," Rebecca said. "I'm just watching birds. I'm not even wearing a—" She reached up and touched her floppy sun hat. It was yellow, though. "She lies!" One of the gnomes took out his bow and picked up an arrow the size of a toothpick. "She wears a hat, and I can see it from here, that it is not light orange." Other gnomes took up their bows and arrows, too. "No, listen," Rebecca held up her bird book. "I'm just watching birds." The gnomes fired their arrows. A few flew right past her. One stuck in the back cover of her bird book. "Get her! Take her prisoner!" Chapter 4. Rebecca slid off the rock and ran away. She had not gotten very far when more tiny arrows flew past her on both sides. She looked back and saw the gnomes were already on top of the rock, aiming at her. Others held on to their floppy orange hats as they ran down the rock and chased her into the leaves. They were little, but they were fast. She kept running. I'm not part of this. I don't care what color your tiny floppy orange hats are. She insulted our hats, one of them said. Another answered, I heard her. Get her. A tiny net flew up by her on the left. A rope flew out at her on the right, with a tiny loop tied around it. It landed on the ground in front of her. She jumped over it as they pulled the rope back. Mister, keep trying. She can't go far. She doesn't even have a bird to fly away on. Rebecca got onto the trail and started running back toward camp. More arrows flew. Some stuck into the trees beside her. She heard a few of the gnome arrows hit her backpack. I have to hide, she said. There is nowhere for dark orange hats to hide from us, one of the gnomes shouted at her in a high voice. She left the trail and started running through the trees again. Follow her, don't let her get away. It was dangerous to run through the woods. It was more dangerous to run through the woods off the trail. Rebecca needed a plan. She didn't like it, but she started running faster to get ahead of them. She's getting away, one of them yelled, but he sounded far away. She looked behind her. She didn't see them anymore, but she could still hear them. There wasn't much time, so she had to move quickly. Rebecca dropped to the ground behind a log. She took off her backpack and her floppy yellow hat. She saw there were tiny arrows stuck in the backpack and the hat. She'd have to deal with that later. She stuffed the pack and the hat into the log. Then Rebecca laid down on the ground and covered herself with leaves. As she finished, she heard tiny feet running through the leaves toward her. If they heard her, then they already knew where she was. She stayed as quiet and as still as she could. They walked all around her hiding spot. One of them said, Where did she go? I don't know. She's a giant. She shouldn't be hard to find. So the dark orange hats have giants working with them now. What do? We have to attack them before they attack us. She heard one of them walking around on top of the log, right above her head. Rebecca held her breath. If they looked in the log, they would find her stuff. There was a long silence. She waited. Get the birds, one of them said finally. We'll search from the air. The dark orange hats won't get away with this. The tiny feet went away, and then there was silence. Rebecca breathed again. She waited and she waited. She wanted to be sure they were finally gone. Finally, she sat up and looked around. Chapter 5. Once she was sure the gnomes were gone, she took her hat and backpack out of the log. Rebecca stared at the tiny arrows for a very long time. This was serious. This was dangerous. Everyone in camp might be in danger. Jake, Cody, Sam might be in danger too. She picked the arrows out of her backpack, her hat, and her book. She put the hat inside the backpack. It was yellow and might make her easier to see if the gnomes flew around on their birds looking for her. Rebecca held her bird book out. She wasn't sure why, but she just wanted to have it with her. She listened to the woods a little while longer, and then she headed back toward the trail. Stepping on the trail, she braced herself for arrows to start flying again. The woods stayed quiet, and she started walking back to Lake Scatterwood. She thought maybe she should go check on the other campers out bird watching. They might be in trouble too. She needed to warn everyone, though. The best way to do that was to get back to camp. It was past time for the bird watching activity to end for the day. The other campers had either gone back to camp already or they were captured. Going back to camp seemed to be the only good choice. Rebecca wanted to run the whole way. If she ran through the woods, she might trip, fall, and hurt herself. She might also get seen easier. If the gnomes were on birds, she couldn't run faster than a bird could fly. Her book said an American robin could fly between 20 and 36 miles per hour. That was 32 and 58 kilometers per hour. In the facts section of the robin page, it said they flew faster while migrating than over short distances between trees or in backyards. The book didn't have any information on how fast birds could fly with angry gnomes on their backs. She decided to walk. Partway to camp, she heard birds overhead. Rebecca stepped off the trail and hid beside a tree. She looked up and saw birds flying between trees. They had a little bit of orange on their feathers and gnomes on their back. The gnomes were talking to each other, but they were way up in the air, and their high voices made them sound like the birds tweeting at each other. She wondered if she had missed gnomes in the past because they sounded like birds. She wasn't sure if they saw her or not. She wasn't sure if they were the same gnomes that chased her earlier. Rebecca waited. Soon they were gone. So she guessed they hadn't seen her. She stepped out onto the trail and opened her bird book. Those weren't American robins this time. She checked the pages with the bookmarks. Barn swallows. Those gnomes were flying on barn swallows. Barn swallows were not as fast as some other birds according to the book. She kept going. Rebecca reached the camp and stepped out of the woods. She looked around and listened. She didn't see or hear any gnomes or birds. She didn't see anybody. The camp looked empty. Chapter 6. There was no one at Lake Scatterwood. All the fields and play areas were empty. No one stood outside the dining hall or the camp store. There wasn't anyone around the cabins that she could see. The lake was empty. No one was swimming. No canoes were out on the water. It was deserted. The camp looked abandoned. That couldn't be good. Rebecca was tempted to call out hello, but she decided that wasn't a good idea. She walked into the dining hall, stood for a moment. It was silent. Chairs were set out around the tables, like normal. But no one was here. No one was cooking in the kitchen. Back outside, keeping an eye on the sky, she moved to the camp store. It was open, but no one was shopping or working there either. She checked the bathrooms. No one was there either. Rebecca stepped back outside and didn't know what to do. She was about to call out, but then she spotted something written on the outside wall of the bathroom, near the corner. She walked over to it. The word was written in blue sidewalk chalk. Help. The letters were shaky and uneven. Maybe the person was scared or in a hurry when they wrote it. Looking around again, Rebecca whispered, "I would love to help if I knew where you were." She spotted more chalk on the ground, further away. Rebecca walked over near the side of the camp store. Kids had drawn on the ground with all different colors of sidewalk chalk. That wasn't unusual. There didn't seem to be any other clues, though. The kids had drawn dragons and castles and a big battle in chalk on the ground. That looked like the kind of stuff Cody, Jake, and Sam drew. Maybe one of them had left the word help on the wall, too. Then she saw more words on the side of the storage building. They were blue again. She walked over and read them. Little creatures attack camp. Fly on birds. Capturing everyone. Rebecca stared at the words a long time. She knew what had happened to everyone, but she didn't know where they were now. She didn't know how to help. When she looked around this time, she saw chalky footprints leading behind the camp store and the dining hall. She followed them and found more blue chalk words. Gnomes. They think we are giants fighting for their enemies, the light orange hats. Almost everyone is captured. We're going to try to get to the guardhouse at the front of the camp. If you read this, try to meet us there. Sam. Now she knew who had left the messages. The letters were straight and even this time. Sam had time to write all this, but they were still trying to hide from the gnomes. She wanted to find her friends. Then they needed to find everyone else. She wondered if Jake and Cody were with him, or if Sam was all by himself, like her. The guardhouse at the front of the camp wasn't really a guardhouse. That was just what the campers called it. It was a small building where the counselors greeted the parents dropping off their kids at the beginning of camp. It was usually empty the rest of the time. It might be a good place to hide. It might be a good place to look for help. She hoped Sam would still be there when she got there. A flock of American robins landed on top of the storage building, a few feet away from Rebecca. Gnomes hopped off their backs. Rebecca ducked back behind the camp store and stood against the back door. The frame of the door provided a little bit of cover where she could hide, but not much. Was that all of them? One of the gnomes asked. Another gnome on top of the storage building said, "I think we got them all. They were tough to capture, but all the giants we could find are in the building we are using as a jail. We have guards watching them." Which building? Rebecca wondered. Did Sam get away? Or did they catch him too? Can you believe those dirty light orange hats started using giants? It's just like them. Light orange hats are always using dirty tricks. We have to stop them. The kingdom belongs to the dark orange hats. Rebecca wanted to scream. She couldn't tell the difference between any of their hats. The gnomes thought they were giants instead of just kids going to camp. The light orange hats thought the kids worked for the dark orange hats, and the dark orange hats thought the kids worked for the light orange hats. They were both wrong, and they were both dangerous. Rebecca wanted to find everyone, but she didn't want to get captured. A different bird with some other orange feathers landed on the storage building, and the gnome and the orange hat jumped off. Rebecca expected them to fight, but the new gnome saluted. "I have a report from the front, sir." "What is it?" "The light orange hats are flying around the woods. They are coming this way, and it looks like they are searching for us." Rebecca thought, "They're searching for me. That's not good. We'll need to warn the others and prepare for battle." The gnomes jumped on their birds and flew away. Rebecca waited a moment and then stepped out from the doorway. She decided she needed to try to get down to the guardhouse that wasn't really a guardhouse. Sam might have made it, and he could still be there, maybe with Jake and Cody too. She took a moment to check her bird book. The new gnome that had shown up on a new bird had been flying on a spotted towhee. Rebecca nodded, closed her book, and snuck away from the back of the camp store. On her way to the front of the camp, she hid behind the storage building for a moment. Then she ran to the bathrooms. She waited there a second, then ran to the rocks. She was about to run from the rocks to a group of trees, but then she heard some birds and stayed hidden. They flew by overhead with gnomes on their backs. Rebecca checked her book and saw they were Altamira orioles. She ran from the rocks to the trees and walked slowly through their shade. She could hear birds but couldn't see them. Maybe they spied for the gnomes in the trees and reported back to them. Maybe the gnomes were about to drop down to attack. She couldn't tell. She kept going. Rebecca had not walked through this part of the woods near the front of the camp before. She tried to stay close to the road that led to the front gate so she would know where she was going. Then she saw more writing on the edge of the road. She looked around carefully and then stepped out of the trees to read the message. They found us. Jake ran to lead them away, but he got caught. Sam. Oh no. The blue chalk letters were shaky again, like Sam had to write them quickly. Did he keep going to the guardhouse? The message didn't say. Chapter 8. Rebecca decided to keep going. She hated thinking the gnomes had caught Jake. If they had, then they must have taken him wherever they held everyone else prisoner, whatever building they were using as a jail. Maybe the guardhouse was the gnome jail. She needed to set them free and somehow defeat the gnomes. Maybe she needed to defeat 2 armies of gnomes. Moving back into cover of the trees, she continued toward the front of the camp. After another minute of walking, she said to herself, I must be getting closer to the guardhouse. She stepped out of the trees again to have another quick look. Another blue message was by her feet. Got Cody. I'm going to run for it. Sam. Staring at the message, she rubbed at her eyes. She had a headache. She felt sad and angry, too. Rebecca followed the quiet road the rest of the way to the guardhouse. When she got there, the front gate was closed, and everything looked quiet. She didn't even hear any birds. Maybe the gnomes were busy fighting each other now. She ran to the door of the guardhouse and waited. Rebecca took a deep breath and tried the knob. The door swung open. It was a little dark inside. She listened but didn't hear anything. Sam, are you in here? She asked quietly. Anyone? There was no answer, so she went inside. The guardhouse was empty, and her heart sank. She didn't give up, but she sat down on the floor under one of the counters to rest and think for a minute. She sat between a cabinet on one side and a folding chair on the other. Okay, maybe Sam was captured too. If he'd made it this far, they either caught him here or he went somewhere else. If he was here, then he'd leave another message, she said. Rebecca started to search, but she didn't have to go look far. On the underside of the shelf above her head, she saw the next blue chalk message from Sam. They have me surrounded. I'm going to keep them out as long as I can. They're taking everyone to the message stopped in the middle of a sentence. Maybe the gnomes got him while he was trying to write this. Sam didn't have time to write his name this time, but the letters looked like the blue letters she had found around camp. Then she saw the piece of blue sidewalk chalk on the floor of the guardhouse. He must have dropped it when the gnomes caught him. He was trying to tell her where the gnomes were taking everyone. She took a deep breath and calmed herself and thought about what to do next. She still needed to find the others. They weren't in the guardhouse, so where were they? She had checked the dining hall, the camp store, and the bathrooms. They could be in one of the cabins. There was a guest cabin nearby. It was a little bigger, but not big enough to hold the whole camp. The gnomes said everyone was in the same place. They could be in the gym. They could be in the storage room between the dining hall and the camp store. A shadow moved by the door of the guardhouse. She heard footsteps. Rebecca curled up tight under the shelf between the cabinet and the chair. Everything was quiet for a long moment. Someone said, hello? The voice wasn't high like a gnome, but Rebecca stayed still and quiet. The voice spoke again. Sam, are you in here? Rebecca said, he's not, but I am. Chapter 9. Rebecca stuck her head out to see who was there. The door swung open slowly. Destiny? Rebecca, I'm glad to see you. Destiny said as she stood in the doorway. How did you get here? There were these crazy little knights on birds instead of horses, Destiny said. They chased us all out of the woods. They caught some of the others, but I kept running. When I got here, they started fighting each other, so I looked for a place to hide. I saw the chalk messages and came here. I'm just glad to not be by myself anymore, Rebecca said. What do we do now? Destiny asked. Rebecca said, we need to find where... Before Rebecca could finish her sentence, tiny ropes wrapped around Destiny and pulled her backward, out of the doorway. Rebecca crawled out from under the shelf to try to help. "We got her," one of the gnomes said in a high voice. "Are there any others?" another gnome asked. "Answer us, giant." Rebecca said, "No, I'm here by myself." Rebecca stopped in her tracks. "Is there anyone inside?" a gnome asked. Destiny answered, "If there was anyone else inside, I'd be in there with them, holding the door closed." "Take her away, I'll go search." Rebecca crawled back under the shelf, between the cabinet and the chair. "Don't bother," another one said. "We already searched in there when we caught the last giant boy who was playing with the chalk. We need to take her to the jail and get ready for the next fight with the light orange hats." Rebecca heard them walking away. A few birds with gnomes on their backs flew away where she could see through the windows of the guardhouse. Those were thrushes, she remembered from the pages she had marked in her bird book. She stood up and looked out the window. A group of gnomes walked along the ground. Destiny's hands were tied, and they were leading her back into the camp. "Keep walking, giant," one of the gnomes said. "We may look small, but we are strong enough to drag you if you won't walk." "I'm walking," Destiny said back. "I should have never taken that bird-watching activity." Rebecca stepped out of the guardhouse and waited. They said they were taking her to the jail. Was there a real gnome jail somewhere, or were they just calling it a jail because that's where they had everyone? "You should have never started working for the light orange hats." Destiny kept walking as she said, "I don't even know what that means. I should get a broom and sweep you guys away." Rebecca decided to try to follow them. If she saw where they took Destiny, maybe she could get everyone out. "You just try it, light orange hat giant." "I'm not a giant, you're just little, and I'm not even wearing a hat." It was difficult to follow along without being seen. She had to stay close enough not to lose them, but she didn't want to get spotted and captured too. She ran across from the guardhouse to the trees again. It sounded to her like the leaves were too loud under her shoes, but she kept going. When the gnomes passed by the rocks with Destiny, Rebecca waited and then ran from the trees to the rocks. The gnomes turned and walked past the kickball fields. There weren't a lot of places to hide that way, so she tried to watch where they went from behind the rocks. She used her bird-watching binoculars to see better. One of the gnomes opened the door to the gym, so that was where they had all the campers. Now she needed to figure out how to get over there without being seen. "Here she is," a gnome said above her head. "She's right here in the dark orange hat camp because she works for them." Rebecca looked up and saw several gnomes on the backs of American redstart birds. "The camp belongs to us, and your hats all look the same," Rebecca yelled. "How dare you?" I told you she worked for them. She just admitted it. Get her." Rebecca ran. They had found her, so Rebecca ran toward the gym. She had already figured out from her bird book that even the slowest flying birds were still faster than most people. Even with the gnomes on their backs, they caught up to her. She started running from side to side in case they tried to shoot little arrows at her or try to throw a net on her. Once she got to the gym, she didn't know what else to do, so she opened the door and ran inside. All the other campers and counselors were there, tied to chairs. The gnomes that were trying to tie Destiny to a chair stopped and stared at Rebecca. No one said anything for a moment. Jake said, "Hey, Rebecca, I would wave, but my hands are a little tied up." "Run," Sam said from his chair next to Jake, "before they get you." "Probably too late," Cody said next to Sam, "but thanks for trying anyway." One of the gnomes said, "There's another one." A second gnome said, "Get her. How many giants do the light orange hats have?" "None," Rebecca said. "None of us work for any gnomes. Not the dark orange hats, not the light orange hats. All your hats look the same. We have nothing to do with what you were fighting about." "All our hats look the same?" The gnomes took off their hats and put them over their hearts. "How dare you!" The gym door burst open and more gnomes on Altamira Orioles flew inside. "Oh no, she brought her light orange hat army with her." Rebecca shook her fists and said, "They aren't my—" "Oh, never mind." Destiny kicked over her chair and ran before they could tie her to it. "Get the others," one of the gnomes on the ground said. "We're under attack." "The birds! To the birds! This is war!" One of the gnomes flying around the gym said, "First, we will finish off you dirty light orange hat villains. Then we'll deal with your giants." Rebecca ran across the gym and started untying Sam. "Your messages in chalk were helpful." "I'm glad," Sam said. "I didn't know what else to do." Once Sam was untied, he started untying Jake. Destiny had already untied Cody. Together, they started freeing everyone else in the gym. More gnomes on the backs of birds flew around the ceiling of the gym. They yelled at each other and hit swords together as they flew past one another in the air. While the battle raged on, everyone was untied, and they ran out of the gym. Outside there was an even greater battle. Robins, orioles, thrushes, swallows, towhees, and more were everywhere in the sky. Gnomes fought all over the camp on the ground too, with swords, axes, spears. Tiny arrows flew everywhere. They need to be careful, Sam said. They're going to put an eye out. Jake said, there is no doubt about it. We are going to get hit by bird droppings before this is all over. Is that what you're worried about? Cody asked. Jake looked up, but covered his head with both hands. It seems like a real concern to me. Thank you for saving us, Rebecca, Sam said. Both Jake and Cody stopped arguing about bird droppings. Yeah, thanks. Jake added, we seem to still need a little more saving, though. Any ideas? Cody asked. Rebecca thought for a moment and then asked, do you still have that bag of pranks you showed me earlier in the summer, Jake? Jake tilted his head and said, yes, I do. I thought the counselors took that from you after you put a whoopee cushion in one of their seats, Cody said. Jake shook his head. Like I would come to camp and only bring one whoopee cushion. Do you guys even know me at all? But you still have it all in your cabin? Rebecca asked. In my trunk at the end of my bunk, Jake said. Are you going to scare off the gnomes by a squirting flower or a spring snake in a can of fake candy? I have an idea, Rebecca said, but we'll need to get all the way across camp to the cabins for it to work. Chapter 11. Let's go, Jake said, but watch out for bird droppings. I'm watching out for arrows, Sam said. The four of them made their way past the kickball field, which was now a field of battle. Birds died from the sky, and the kids had to duck. It still looked like the gnomes were fighting each other. Some of the campers ran back to the gym to get away from the fighting. Rebecca looked for Destiny, but didn't see her. The gnomes fought each other on the paved area of the camp, too. One gnome dropped his sword and picked up a piece of green chalk and used it as a sword instead. Green dust flew everywhere as the kids covered their eyes and kept running. They had to be careful not to step on any of the gnomes. Tiny orange hats flew past the kids. So did arrows. Give me my hat back, dark orange hat monster. Stop throwing my hat, you light orange hat creatures. The kids stopped next to this camp store. We haven't made it very far, Sam said. Cody shook his head. This is out of control. We need to keep going, Rebecca said. If they are fighting each other, they aren't paying attention to us. A high voice said, now we have found you, giants. Back to the jail with you. Gnomes stood around them with swords ready. I think they're paying attention to us again, Jake said. Surrender, one of the gnomes ordered. You are prisoners of the dark orange hats again. Wait, another gnome said. You're a dark orange hat? I thought you were a light orange hat, like me. Prepare to be defeated. There was a light orange hat in our midst at this entire time. Get him! I'm a light orange hat too. I'm getting you. The gnomes started fighting each other again, but still had kids surrounded. Destiny ran up with a broom and started sweeping the gnomes. They screamed and started running. Thank you, Rebecca said. Destiny waved her broom. No problem. Not just the broom, Rebecca said. It was brave to not tell them where I was when we were at the guardhouse. One of us had to stay free so we could save the others, Destiny said. You're welcome. Do you want to go with us to get some whoopee cushions from the cabins? Jake asked. Destiny stared at Jake for a moment. Don't make it weird, Jake. As Destiny ran off to keep sweeping, Rebecca, Cody, Sam, and Jake ran around behind the camp store and continued toward the cabins. More gnomes landed on the ground in front of them and jumped off their birds. That's far enough, a gnome with a spear said. Surrender to the dark orange hats. I'm a light orange hat, another gnome said. I can't believe I've been flying with you this entire time. You surrender. Rebecca said, see, you guys can't tell the difference between your hats either. There is no point in this fight. Just stop fighting and get along. How dare you, the gnomes ran toward the kids. We could sure use a broom right now, Cody said. Jake picked up a tiny sword from the ground and started fighting the gnomes. He had to get on his hands and knees to sword fight with them. What are you doing? Sam asked. Fighting back, Jake said, as he waved the tiny sword at them. Why are you using a toy sword to do it? Sam asked. They wouldn't let me bring a full-size sword to camp, Jake said. Believe me, I asked. This has to stop, Rebecca said. She pulled off all the gnomes' hats and threw them to the side. There, try to figure out which ones are light orange and which ones are dark orange. The gnomes ran off and the kids kept going for the cabins. I can't tell which one's mine, one of the gnomes said. This one is dark orange. No, it's this one. Give it back. Chapter 12. They reached the cabins. Jake opened the door and said, Rebecca, you're not allowed to come into the boys' cabin. I'll get the whoopee cushions and bring them out here. That's not what I need, Rebecca said. Jake crossed his arms. Then why do we waste our time coming all the way up here? I could have poked my finger on a gnome sword really bad. I could have gotten poked by a gnome arrow. I could have gotten covered in bird droppings. Just drag your trunk out here so I can find what I need, please, Rebecca said. All three boys dragged Jake's trunk out onto the porch of their cabin and opened it. Rebecca started digging through it as she searched. Hey, Jake said, be careful. Don't unfold my clothes. You never fold your clothes, Jake, Sam said. I'm just going to wear them again anyway. What's the point, Jake asked. Don't bend the corners of my comic books either, please. Sir, I would never fold down the pages of any book, Rebecca said. Really, Jake said. How do you mark your place when you're reading? Rebecca shook her head. This trunk is a mess. Maybe if you told me what you were looking for, Jake said. The air horn, Rebecca said. Jake thought for a minute and then said, yeah, I don't remember where that is. It has to be in there somewhere. I put everything in that trunk. Rebecca shook her head again and kept searching. Several birds landed around the cabin on the porch. The kids looked around as Rebecca kept searching. There were no gnomes on the backs of these birds. Are the birds spies? Sam asked. Are they going to tell the gnomes where we are? I don't know, maybe, Rebecca said, without looking up from the trunk. Cody said it would be cool to fly on the back of a bird. I'd be scared of being up that high, Sam said. Is there a bird big enough to carry a person? Jake asked. In a place like Lake Scatterwood? Cody said. Probably. I don't think so, Rebecca said, but I have a bird book if you want to look it up. Jake shook his head. Maybe later. I don't care enough to actually read about it. That's sad, Rebecca said. Jake shrugged. Getting captured by angry gnomes doesn't put me in a reading mood, I guess. How are we going to stop them? Jake asked. How do we get rid of them? Rebecca brought out the air horn. Found it. Okay, Jake said. Now what? Rebecca tested the horn. It gave one quick, loud blare. The sound scared off the birds. Cody said, oh, I think I get it. But what about the gnomes fighting on the ground? We'll figure it out, she said. The kids ran back down to the camp. Gnomes fought everyone on the ground and in the sky. Rebecca blasted the air horn. The birds scattered. Gnomes fell off, and other gnomes on the ground caught them. She walked through the camp, blasting the horn over and over until all the birds had flown away. When she finished, Jake said, good job. Sam said, you guys, I think we might be in trouble. All the gnomes had stopped fighting and were staring at the kids. So, are you guys mad? Jake asked the gnomes. You scared off our birds, one of the gnomes said. You dark orange-hat giants have gone too far. They're not our giants, another gnome said. They are your giants. You are lying, light orange-hat liar. I'll make you pay for that insult, you insulting dark orange-hat insulter. Everyone, just calm down a second, Rebecca said. We don't work for either of you. We just got caught in the middle of your fighting. We have nothing to do with this, but you captured us anyway. We could have been hurt, and none of us did anything wrong. You scared off our birds, the gnome said. I hate to agree with a light orange hat, but that's true. I'm not a light orange hat, I'm a dark orange hat. Sorry about that, the sun was in my eyes. Rebecca sighed and then asked, what are you gnomes fighting about anyway? This war goes back many eons to the earliest days of gnome history, one gnome said. It all started when our ancestors tried to decide what color hats to wear. Another gnome groaned. Light orange hats tell the longest, most boring stories. I already told you that I'm a dark orange hat. Sorry, I'm really sorry. The sun is so bright today. I think I got the wrong hat when mine got thrown away. Wait, another gnome said. You took my light orange hat. The gnome threw the hat down on the ground. I can't believe you guys let me wear this the whole time without saying something. Don't throw down my hat, you disrespectful dark orange hat. That is why we must defeat you. Light orange hats are the ones who need to be defeated. Stop, Rebecca said. Just stop. All of you, stop a minute and listen. Make it quick, giant, one of the gnomes said. We need to get back to this war. Why are you fighting the war? Rebecca asked. Why did your hats cause a war? Our people agreed on orange hats, and there was peace in the land for many generations, a gnome said. But then the rebels started wearing dark orange hats instead of light orange hats we all agreed to wear. That's not true. The light orange hats are the rebels. Why do you have to fight each other over the shade of orange to wear? Rebecca said. Because the light orange hats insist on wearing light orange hats. It's you dark orange hats. They're the problem. They keep wearing dark orange hats. Rebecca asked, why can't you wear the hat that you want to wear and leave the other alone? Oh, silly giant, do you really believe it's that simple? The gnomes laughed. Sounds like the kind of silly thing a dark orange hat would say. Only half the gnomes laughed at the last part. Prepare for war. Okay, you gnomes need to take a break. Just don't fight until you find your birds again, and don't fight in our camp, Rebecca said. Come back here and use our camp to talk about your differences instead of fighting. You don't have to agree, but you can live without always fighting each other for now. One gnome scratched his head and said, I'm tired of getting my hat thrown, and then not knowing if I got the right one again. All the gnomes seemed to agree with that. 10 years later. And there has been peace in the Gnome Kingdom ever since, Counselor Jake said. Sometimes the gnomes still come back to Lake Scatterwood, and Camp Director Rebecca helps them talk through their problems to avoid conflict over important things like whether light orange hats or dark orange hats are best. That doesn't sound all that important thing to fight about at all, one of the boys at the campfire said. Don't tell the gnomes that, Jake said. They get really mad. Is that story true, Camp Director Rebecca? Rebecca smiled and said, I did learn to love bird watching that summer, and I became friends with Destiny. We're still friends today. Great story, Counselor Jake, one of the boys said. I think we're ready to go bird watching now. Will we see any gnomes flying on the backs of birds? The girl asked. The campers all laughed. Rebecca said, just look for the birds on this hike, and when we stop, stay very quiet so we don't scare them off. So no air horns, the boy asked. Counselors Jake and Cody led the way up the trail. As Counselor Sam and Camp Director Rebecca followed the kids hiking, Sam asked, You want me to bring the sidewalk chalk just in case we get captured? I don't think so, Rebecca asked. The gnomes are at peace. Didn't you listen to the story? The entire camp spent the afternoon bird watching. They saw a lot of birds. Rebecca still used her old bird book from when she was a camper. They saw a few orange birds, but no gnomes on that particular trip. I hope you enjoyed that little bit of a different take on the podcast this week, and I look forward to talking to you again next week. Okay, that's the end of the podcast. I appreciate you guys listening in, whether you're seeing this on Twitch or on YouTube later or on Patreon later. Thanks for listening in, and we will end it here.